So today, we're starting out a new series. If you're in 8 o'clock, you already kind of heard the first week of it, but today we're talking about conflict. This will be a 4-week series, and the idea is, especially over this past year, there were lots of problems, lots of personal problems, even mental health struggles that a lot of people face and different challenges in their lives, so we really want to speak right into those. And so the topic for today is conflict. And so I want to kind of start out just by getting us thinking about how we ourselves, how we handle conflict, how we are in conflict, how we deal with conflict. And so I've got a little graph here. If you're maybe in the business world or you've done any kind of conflict resolution training, you might be familiar with this. There are, I guess business people say, there are 5 types of conflict management or resolution, and these are 5 types that you could use for any situation, or you might find yourself kind of seeing one of these types and saying, oh yeah, that's me in conflict. And I kind of want to just walk through these, and now I'm going to kind of walk through these, and then you're going to be kind of talking at your tables and talking about which of these is most natural to you, which of these styles, and then which of these is the least natural to you, all right? So starting out with competing, okay? So competing is one way that people might manage conflict. And now if you see, kind of got 2 axes here going up and down. Kind of if you have a really high importance of achieving a goal, of getting a job done, getting a task done, then that might be a style that you go for the competing style. Whereas as you see on the bottom axis, going left to right there at the bottom, is the importance of a relationship. So if you're dealing with someone, or you got some kind of situation where you really need to get this job done, and you know what, you don't really care how much that relationship lasts, then yeah, you would slip into the competing style that you've got to get it done. You don't really care who gets hurt in the process. That is kind of what this competing style is all about. Now, sort of the opposite is an accommodating style. Basically, you might be someone who says, anytime conflict comes up, well, I don't really care what we do as long as, something gets done. Or I don't really care, I just don't want anyone to be upset, don't want anyone to be troubled or hurt. You might be thinking, okay, yeah, this is actually kind of more of myself, that I'm totally willing to accommodate, because what's most important to me in a lot of conflicts is maintaining the relationship. And as far as getting things done, might not be quite as important. Now here, if you don't really care about the goal, you don't really care too much about the relationship, you might be someone who would avoid. And that would be where, if there's 3 of us standing here, and 2 of them are kind of getting into an argument, I would kind of smile and nod, and then slowly just walk away and not really deal with it at all. And that's what someone who avoids does. They will not respond to texts. They will not return phone calls. They will just avoid it. Maybe this, again, is you sometimes. When conflict comes up, you just would rather avoid it. Kind of going right in the middle, which is fitting because it's all about compromising. And here, we can kind of think of it as, you get some and you give up some. You win some, you lose some of this. And there's a funny story about compromising, especially when this goes wrong. So there are 2 chefs who are working in a kitchen, and they both needed to make a dish that dealt with, they needed an orange to make their dish. And there's just one orange, though. So now these 2 chefs are thinking, okay, well, what are we going to do? We both need an orange. How are we going to solve this? So they say, okay, you know what? Let's be fair. Let's split it down the middle, literally cut it in half, and you take one half of the orange, and I'll take the other half. So that's what they do. They cut it in half, and they start getting to their dishes. Little did they realize, one guy just needed the juice, the other guy just needed the rind. So, yes, they split the difference, but honestly, neither of them really got what they really needed, and they could have just, if they talked a little bit more about it, one of them could have gotten the rind, gotten the grading of the orange, the other one could have gotten the juice. And that's kind of the thing with compromising. Yes, you'll get something, but you're always kind of giving up something else, and with compromising. But a lot of times, again, if you just don't have a lot of time to get some kind of conflict, this is how it goes. My wife and I, we love watching the show House Hunters. What is that whole show about? Compromise. They want a jacuzzi tub, but they want archways in their, to their kitchen, and they want an island, but they don't want an island, and so they always got to compromise. And that's what kind of home buying is all about, is what are you willing to compromise on? So again, with different situations, different people might settle to compromise. And finally, this would be, I guess, the best case scenario, what would be called collaborating. This was what could be called a win-win, that somehow, some way, no one had to give up anything, that everyone got exactly what they wanted. Now, how realistic is that? How often does that happen? Yeah, not all that often. Because even if you get to that point where you all are extremely happy, no one had to compromise on anything, and you work together and you figured out a solution that made it best for everyone, that's great. But is it always realistic? And honestly, how much time does that take? It could take a long time to really just sit down and be like, okay, we're not going to leave this room until we reach something where we're all happy. And you're there for like hours, and you're like, all right, you know what? I give up. So a lot of times that might not always be there, but some of you might be more naturally wired that you don't want to give up anything, and you want to make some kind of solution work, and you're going to figure it out, and you're going to put in the effort and the time to do it. So these are 5 styles of conflict. Now what I want you guys to do, as you're thinking about this, I want you to talk a little bit about, at your tables, which of these styles, as you think about the different conflicts you might have in your life, which of these styles is the one you maybe gravitate towards, which is the style that is most natural, and then which style is the least natural to you. And if you can think of a scenario that doesn't call anyone out at your table, husbands, wives, looking at you, then you can share that. But just take a little bit of time now, a few minutes, and just kind of discuss, okay, which of these styles is most or least natural to you? All right. Well, is everyone a conflict expert now? You totally know the best ways to deal with conflict. In only 5 minutes. That's great. No, but hopefully that was a little bit of a good exercise, kind of a reflection exercise to see, okay, yeah, honestly, if I'm being honest, maybe I do avoid a lot, and maybe have good reasons for it, but no matter which style you thought was most natural or least natural, here's kind of the important thing to remember. Any of these styles could be done in a faithful way, and any of these styles could be done actually in an unfaithful way. And as I was thinking about it and pondering it, Jesus, I could think of an example for each where Jesus kind of has one of these styles of managing conflict. And so I was like, okay, that's all I need to know that, okay, there are different ways to go about things. And what's helpful with this is like, yeah, okay, it's nice to have some categories to kind of think about the ways that we might deal with conflict, and it's good to be aware of those things. But ultimately, just kind of knowing the different styles of conflict is not going to be enough to know how to go about managing conflict faithfully. And yeah, it can give us maybe a good starting point, and it's good maybe sort of practical wisdom to have, but Scripture is where we're going to find how do we manage any conflict faithfully, and how do we have that guidance that we need to make sure that we are actually in these situations and dealing with these things in a faithful way. And so that's what I really think, so you can keep these in mind, but we're going to really let the story for today, the story with Abram and Lot, we're going to let that really shape and inform the ways that we deal with conflict, handle conflict, no matter what style might be most natural to you, all right? So what we're going to do, if you see on your sheet, we're going to be starting in the observation section. And basically, this is just a really simple Bible study method that I will use. I will kind of go through this for sermon prep sometimes. And this is an easy kind of Bible study method that you can take whenever you're doing Bible study. It's just 3 parts: observation, interpretation, and application. Okay, so observation, right now as we're reading Scripture, we're just going to be observers of what's going on. We're just noticing, okay, what are the things that are happening and making sure that we know. And the first thing, when I come to this text and this story, I see, all right, well, it feels like when you start at in chapter 13, verse 1, so Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Right there, it's like, all right, I feel like I'm jumping right into the middle of a story. I'm going to need some context. And that's really, as far as the style, as far as the genre or the style of literature that we're dealing with here in Genesis, we're dealing with a narrative. We're dealing with a story. And so with any story, you're going to need to know that if you're jumping right in the middle, then you need to know kind of what led up to this point, what's happened up until then, so that when we come to the story, we know exactly what's going on. So even though we're going to be in chapter 13, we're going to start in chapter 12, and we're going to kind of just get the lay of the land and make sure we know what's going on. So jumping back, chapter 12. Okay, we're just going to kind of read this and walk through this, and kind of observe what's going on. So starting with verse 1, it says, "The Lord had said to Abram, 'Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you.' And God promises him, 'I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you.'" So then after receiving that blessing, they go. It says, "So Abram left, and as the Lord had told him," and who went with him? Lot. Okay, so right away, Abram and Lot, his nephew, they're going to be setting out together. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran, and he took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions that they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. All right, so kind of looking at this, first thing to observe is that the land of Canaan, whose land really is that? Who was promised and given this land? It's Abram, okay? Now, just keep note of that, because then they go over to Egypt. If you jump down to verse 10, now there's a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. So they spend some time in Egypt, and it's pretty funny. I was thinking, okay, every time it seems like there's a famine, people always go to Egypt. Why is that? You know? And because it happens like just a few chapters later with Jacob and the whole story with Joseph. There's another famine, everyone goes to Egypt. Well, why? Because, as Pastor Zach said, Egypt is awesome. Egypt was great. And Egypt was pretty much famine-proof because they had the Nile. And I just wanted to share a picture of a beautiful resort that's on the Red Sea in Egypt. I don't remember the name of it, but you can tell that if back then, if it looked anything like this, that's pretty nice. And it's staying green all the time because, again, the Nile, Egypt, it's a great place to be. Now, to think about how Egypt was, think about Egypt like we think about Las Vegas, okay? It was a place where it was kind of all the riches, all the extravagance, all the great things, like you could win a lot of money, you can get a lot of money and things in Egypt. So that's kind of the best kind of modern-day comparison I have, that when you see Egypt, think of Vegas, and it was some kind, like they always had enough money, enough resources for everyone, and so that's where they went when the famine struck. They went down to Egypt, spent some time there, and then finally, when the famine was getting done, they were going to head back to Canaan. And while they were there, though, in Egypt, Abram really, he must have like struck the lottery because he's coming back with even more stuff than he left with. Okay, so he's got all these things, all this stuff that they're bringing back, and so this is kind of what's been going on. And then jumping again now to chapter 13, verse 1. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. Like we said, that's what happens when you go down to Egypt. Now from the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, and to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Okay, so notice here, they were sort of in this place in the land of Canaan for a time, went down to Egypt, and then they came back to basically the same place. And now just a little fun tidbit with the names here, because they're kind of strange, especially Ai. That's a weird name, it seems. But Bethel, if you didn't know, that means house of God. Ai, that we think is a word that basically means a heap, or, to put it not so lightly, a dump. So Abram's sort of setting up camp right between the house of God and a dump. And I thought, isn't that just how life is? Sometimes you're just caught between the good and the bad. And so that's where he sets up his camp. Now here's where things get interesting. Verse 5, now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. So they kind of have a good problem on their hands. At least that's what I think. You know, you got so much stuff. Okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to resolve this conflict? And now I've been kind of highlighting along the way, whose land is this, really? It's Abram's land. Lot was never given a promise of a land. He's just fortunate enough to be tagging along with Abram. But this is Lot's land. Okay, Abram, he was the rightful heir to God's promised land. That's the first thing to really remember. That Abram was the rightful heir to God's promised land. First observation to make. It's all throughout chapter 12 and then chapter 13. Abram was the rightful heir. Now, this is going to be important when we get to kind of talking through how this conflict is resolved or managed. So then going to verse 7. And quarreling arose between Abram's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Lot. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land at the time. So, again, too many people in too small a space, they start fighting, which if that wasn't true over this past year for many people, I mean, stuck inside, how many of you were said, I just need to get out and get some fresh air when you were just stuck inside, maybe you got kids running around, it's like day in, day out, things are crazy. Yes, so that kind of feeling of just being stuck in a place, not enough space, too many people, that's what was going on here, that they just needed a little bit of breathing room, needed to figure out how they can make this work, kind of resolve this conflict, and make it as good as a situation as they could. Now notice, though, verse 8. Look at how it starts. It says, "So Abram said to Lot, 'Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are brothers.'" Two things I want to point out with that. For one, they weren't actually brothers. Lot was Abram's nephew. But Abram calls Lot his brother. Says, "You know what? I see you as an equal. And I'm not going to try and play a power move to get what I want, but instead I'm coming right to you as an equal." And so that's the first thing to notice, that they're not actually brothers, but Abram calls Lot his brother. Second thing to notice, pretty obvious, who kind of takes the first step in solving this? It's Abram. But now remember, Abram is the rightful heir, he's the rightful owner of this land. So, I mean, Lot's just cramping his style. Abram is the one who is supposed to be here, and Lot, he really probably even shouldn't have gone with him. Some scholars say that with Abram allowing Lot to go with him, that was sort of going against God's command in a way. It was a little slight disobedience because God told Abram, leave your family, leave everything you had and go to this land. But yet he brought Lot with him. Really loved his nephew Lot. But now it's kind of coming back to haunt him a little bit. But again, Abram takes the first step. This really wasn't supposed to be Abram's problem. Lot was kind of causing the problem. But Abram takes the first step. And as far as the second observation, that's kind of the second observation to make. As far as what Abram does, his actions, Abram took the first step towards reconciliation. And this is huge. Because again, I think about myself in that situation, I would have said, well, this town's not big enough for the two of us, and see you later, Lot. It was great having you, but I guess we just can't work this out, so go back to where we all came from, and God gave me this land, and he did not give you this land, so I'm going to enjoy this land, and you have a great life. Could have said that, didn't say that. Abram wanted to work this out, and he took the first step, where really it should have been Lot. So that's the second observation we can kind of see in this text. Now, going on a little bit further, verse 9. "Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. And if you go to the left, I'll go to the right. And if you go to the right, I'll go to the left." In verse 10, Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, kind of like the Nile, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, toward Zor. And this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So, not too familiar with the geography. Lot is kind of setting up camp right by where Sodom and Gomorrah would have been. And then if you know kind of how the rest of the story with Lot goes in a few chapters later, it doesn't end so well. But notice here what Abram does. He says, if you want this land, great. But if you want that land, super. He's giving Lot the first choice. Now just remind me again. Who was the rightful heir to this land? Abram. And what is he doing? He's letting Lot choose. The thing that God gave him, that thing he had every right to, he was willing to give up because of how much he loved Lot. I mean, that's pretty incredible. It was his. God gave it to him. And he was willing to give it up for the sake of love. Incredible. And that's really the third thing to observe. For Abram's mindset, that he laid down what was rightfully his for the sake of love. Pretty incredible example. And now it turns out Lot does not choose sort of the specific portion that Abram was given. He chooses what looked better, but ended up not turning out so well for him. I think when you go to church, you'll see a nice side-by-side picture of that, of the land that Lot chose versus the land that Abram chose, I guess, after Lot had. And it's funny. In verse 10, notice the comparisons that are made with this land. It said that the plain of the Jordan is well watered like the garden of the Lord, like Eden. But Lot had never been to Eden. He didn't know that. But this is kind of a note to us, a little nod, because something happened in that garden where someone looked at something and they thought it looked really good. And so they said, you know what, I want that. Does that sound familiar at all? Yes. And that's exactly what we should be thinking of, is that just like Eve took the fruit that she really shouldn't have been taking, but she was kind of just seeing what looked good and just took it, that's exactly how Lot's operating. And so we see that with the way that Lot's making this decision, instead of maybe also wanting to think about that, well, you know what, God gave you this land, so I'll go somewhere else, he just went for what looked the best, and again, it did not turn out so well for him, because in the next chapter, Lot gets into trouble, Abram rescues him. But I just wanted you to notice that it's an interesting description, that this was like the garden of the Lord. But of course, Lot, he's probably thinking more about that second comparison, like the land of Egypt. He just came from the extravagant land of Egypt, and now he's coming back. He's like, boy, I love that life. I'd like a little bit more of that, and that's what he's wanting to get back. So that's how Lot's thinking. That's how Lot's going about this. He's really going about this whole thing pretty selfishly. He's really just thinking about himself, me, myself, and I, whereas Abram, totally selflessly. Totally selflessly. And so as I read this story, now I think, okay, how do we as Christians understand this? How do we apply this? And of course, we kind of apply everything in light of Jesus, right? We first see and understand, how does this story relate to the story of Jesus? And then we kind of turn to ourselves. And now we've kind of done the observations that we're kind of focusing on Abram here. And now turning to the interpretation, how do we understand this in light of Jesus? What I do and what I did for this story, I wanted to kind of compare Abram to Jesus. And this kind of interpretation of the Old Testament, because sometimes the Old Testament can be really maybe difficult to interpret, because sometimes there's some weird stuff going on. But this is a really common, maybe the most common way to interpret the Old Testament faithfully, and that's what we're going to do. And the type of interpretation that we're going to do, as far as comparing Abram and Jesus, it's called typology. Yes, very exciting, right? It's called typology. And basically what it means is all the people in the Bible, in the Old Testament, there's sometimes ways to think about them, or something they did, something about them, think about them as a type of Christ. Meaning they did something, and that sort of points to something about Jesus or something Jesus did, and that's kind of a common way that we see the Old Testament being interpreted, and how to interpret it in light of Jesus and everything. So we got our type and our antitype. Okay, I know you're back in school now. You got your glasses on, thinking cap. This is kind of really get into the scholarly weeds a little bit, but I think it's hugely important and hugely helpful of knowing how do we interpret these stories faithfully and rightly. And so Christ, he is always the antitype. Now I know it's a weird word, but basically it means he's like the type of all types. He is the one. And everyone else is just a type of Christ. Whether you're talking about Moses or Noah or Job or now with Abram, they're all just kind of types of Christ. And we see, okay, what did they do? Who were they? What can we say about them? And how did that tie into Jesus? And what's nice is this story kind of lines it up really easily, where I think we can make this comparison pretty easily. One of the greatest examples of this kind of interpretation of the Old Testament comes from Romans chapter 5, and it's verses 18 and 19. So I'll just kind of talk through what's going on here, just so you have an idea of what you're going to do. So Romans 5, 18 and 19, it says, "Consequently, just as the result of one trespass was condemnation for all men, so also the result of one act of righteousness was justification that brings life for all men. Okay, so there's St. Paul doing exactly what we are about to do. Meaning he's taking, who is he comparing Jesus to in Romans 5 there? The one man that brought trespass into the world? Adam, yes, garden of the Lord, all this. So he's comparing Adam and Jesus. And he's saying, just as the one act of trespass brought death for everyone, Jesus' one act of righteousness brought life to everyone. And it's even, you can think about the tree that brought the curse, as opposed to the tree that Jesus became a curse on to bring life to everyone. So you see this kind of comparison. This is how so many stories can be interpreted in this kind of way. So this is what we're going to be doing. This is what you all are going to be doing at your tables. I know you can do it. And really be focusing on kind of three things. They're going to parallel pretty well with the three observations that we made about Abram, about Jesus' identity, Jesus' actions, and Jesus' mindset. So we'll be working together, trying to figure out, okay, how does Abram kind of point to something about Jesus in these kind of three ways? And you should kind of find it somewhere. And there's no one right answer. I'll give you my answers when we're all kind of done and we'll bring it back. But just give it your best. Let's see how it goes. Well, it sounds like some good chatter. I'm sure that only took you like 2 minutes, then you're just talking about the game or, whatever. I don't know what kind of games are going on. But, so I don't know how that exercise was for everyone. I know it's kind of a tall order maybe, but don't worry. I appreciate you humoring and giving it your best. But we're going to kind of talk through it and walk through it and kind of see, okay, what are the parallels that we can draw. So first with Jesus' identity. Kind of the way I like to phrase it or say it was, Abram was the rightful heir of God's promised land. Then Jesus was the rightful heir of God's kingdom. Right? I mean, that's kind of the point, and I don't remember exactly which, and I think there's with verse 5, how he's very equal with God, that Jesus was. So with Jesus' equality with God, then it kind of goes that everything that was God's was also his. So that would be the first kind of point as far as Jesus' identity and Abram's identity. And then as far as Jesus' actions, Abram took the first step towards reconciling. And who took the first step in reconciling us to God? It was Jesus. That's the whole story of the gospel, that God came down. That before we ever loved God, God loved us, and he sent his son to die for us. So you see how Abram is kind of pointing to who Jesus is and what Jesus did, that Jesus took the first step in bringing reconciliation. And not only that, but as far as mindset goes, Abram was willing to lay down everything for the sake of love. And isn't that exactly what's true for Jesus? That Jesus was willing to empty himself, to die on a cross for love. He alone was the rightful heir of God's kingdom, and yet he wanted to make sure everyone could be a co-heir of God's kingdom, could be part of God's kingdom with him. It was his to have, and it was his to give. That's exactly what he did, is that he gave it up, and he gave it to us. That's why we're here. We are a part of God's kingdom because of what Jesus did. And so we moved from Abram, moved to Jesus, moving to us. What does this all mean? What kind of implications are there for us? You're going to talk about it a little bit. Again, I know. But just to kind of leave it with you, the question that kept coming to my head thinking about this is, what if? Okay, so what if we followed the example of Jesus in our conflicts? What if, for the sake of love, we were willing to lay down even what was rightfully ours? I mean, that's the example of Jesus. In Philippians 2, verse 5 is what it says, have the same mindset as Jesus Christ in your relationships. The same mindset. Okay. Well, what is that mindset? It's the mindset that's willing to go above and beyond for the people we love. That when you're maybe locked into a conflict, that you're going to let yourself be second and put the other person first. Well, yeah, but this was actually mine, and I had a right to this thing or that thing. Well, I am so glad that you had a right to this thing or that thing. But you know what we do with the things that we have a right to? We steward those things. We use those things for the sake of others. That's what it's all about. And so, just thinking about, okay, what does this mean? What does this mean for our conflicts? That whatever style of conflict, or however you're going about with conflict, whatever kind of conflicts you have, to think about who Jesus is, what Jesus did, and how he thought about it. And to take on that same mindset. That even though we have everything in God, we should be willing, and the first ones, to use that, or even to lay it down, for the sake of love. That is the message from Abram. That's the message of the cross. That's the message for us. So now, talk to each other again, and talk about what's anything from today that challenges the way that you see conflict, and then how are you maybe more equipped for conflict in the future. Take 3 minutes. Well, everyone, we are already at our time. And thanks for making this a great first ABC back. Thanks for talking to each other. For whatever kind of conflicts that you might have had at your table, I hope you're able to work through them in love. But again, I really appreciate it. And before we go, why don't we close in prayer? Heavenly Father, we thank you that you show us how to love and how to follow the example of your Son who gave up everything to bring us into life and into your kingdom. So God, in all the ways and all the conflicts that we might have going on, give us wisdom, give us your Spirit to reflect you in those, to follow your Son and to let him and his love be evident in all those ways. God, we ask this all in his name. Amen. All right, thanks everybody.